The planets have aligned, and once again, remarkably, the prophecy has come true.
Every damn week.
That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast. With me, your host, Uncle Paddy, joined every week by twin brother and spare partsman, Andy, the asshole.
Woo!
And of course, we couldn't do any of this without bestie, Stevie Tel Aviv.
Good evening, gentlemen.
This week, we'll be discussing AI again. Following on from last week, we'll be talking about Claude 3.7 and ChatGPT 4.5. We'll be talking AI agents. What are they? What can they do for you? And who's building them? And how they're going to disrupt
Everything.
every goddamn thing. And then finally, we discuss the cost of war in Ukraine, the lessons learned, and what the future might look like. Plus, any goddamn thing we please.
Another epic news for week, boys. The docket is stuffed full.
Or even an epic week for news.
Absolutely. And there is no shortage of things to talk about. And what a breadth of things to talk about tonight, all the way from AI to nuclear, not nuclear stuff, but military stuff.
Yeah.
But as Paddy was saying before we came on air, our episodes have been creeping and getting longer and longer. Our last one was an hour and 15, 20, something like that. So we're going to try and keep tonight to an hour or less.
Yeah.
Good news is we're all going to our beds early.
Somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour would be nice, I think. A nice little palate cleanser for everybody. So when we finished the podcast last week, one of the last things I said on the podcast is that by the time we sit down here next week again, it's probably likely that Claude would have came out with the most recent version of their model. And it was also likely that ChatGPT would launch 4.5. Well, from my lips to the AI god's ears, that is precisely what happened. Claude 3.7 launched about an hour after we published the podcast last week, and ChatGPT 4.5 came out about a day later. So having had ample time to sample them both, I thought I would just give our listeners a little bit of a rundown on what they both do well. Are they incremental improvements or massive generational leaps? And where does it leave me in terms of where my thoughts are about the future of AI, or at least for the rest of 2025, and what are my predictions about what's going to happen there? So let's start with Claude 3.7. So Claude 3.7 is hailed as the world's first hybrid model. Can do both retrieval and inference time reasons. So what that means is, let's just explain the two terms for everybody listening. So retrieval models would be an example of that, would be ChatGPT 4, not 4.0, 4. So a retrieval model can query and reason across the data it's been trained on. Okay? So it can go into that data set that it's been trained on. It can pull information out of that and make sense of it and play it back to you. They're very quick and they've historically been very cheap to run.
Yeah.
Reasoning models tap into the same data set, but they reason over the data over and over and over again. Reasoning models are their own distinct class of model, even though they work on the same training data set, but they're very expensive to run and they take a while to come back with the answer.
Yeah.
But they do tend to bring back a better quality answer, right?
Yeah.
Based on the principle that if you gave somebody with 150 points of IQ 4 seconds to work on your problem, and you give the same person with 140 points of IQ 2 hours to work on your problem, they'll come up with a higher quality.
Person number two will
answer.
get you a better answer, yeah.
So you could do ChatGPT 4 for simple, fast responses, or you could select 4.0 to get reasoning. You don't have to do any of that in Claude. You just use Claude 3.7 and Claude will intelligently figure out if it can do retrieval.
If there's a reasoning requirement there.
Or if it can do reasoning without having to go to a separate model. So that's noteworthy. Other kind of interesting functionality it's got is you can assign any given query to Claude 3.7 if you're using the API version, a thinking budget. So you can say, as you answer this question, you've got a thinking budget of 30 seconds to answer this question. Or I'm quite happy for you to have a thinking budget of 10 minutes to answer the question. And so, of course, the quality and the variety answers will differ depending on the thinking budget you apply. So that was a pretty interesting characteristic of the Claude model.
And there's a manual version of that on other models that it's competing against. So a lot of the other models have added in. So there's deep research or think.
Grok. I think
And
it's
so
called.
if you look at Grok, for example, if you click the think button, it might think for 30 to 60 seconds about your problem before returning an answer. So it knows you want something back quick, but it just wants a wee bit of time to think. But if you really need like it to go away and, you know, check out quantum physics or something like that, you hit deep research and it'll go and think for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and come back with an answer.
The one thing I was speaking to people today that I think should be stressed is the answers are only ever as good as the questions raised.
Yeah.
And the big problem that you've got with the incongruous answers is, or the lack of consistency, is the questions can be framed different ways by different people, and therefore, no matter how good the model is, it's something that I think people should remember. You need to spend your time understanding how to prompt and how to structure, because that will make a huge difference in the consistency and the quality of the answer you get back.
100%. And one of the things that I know you're going to touch on is the consistency issue with Claude, and that's one of its kind of key differentiators from other models.
Yeah, exactly. So Claude is, by any measure, absolute state of the art
Frontier
when it comes
model.
to coding. Coding specifically, there is nothing can compete with Claude. It is the best at that of any model available today. When I think about Claude, I think about the adult in the room. Claude's he's the guy who comes from behind, but by the time he comes to market, the outputs, the product's professionalized, the outputs are very, very slick. It's got the safety guardrails built into it. It's the grown-up, professional, highly polished version of all this stuff. Whereas, like, Grok has moments of complete genius, but it's a bit drunk and crazy at the same time.
And ChatGPT's got that kind of bubbly, enthusiastic, really smart teenager kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. So Claude super excels at coding and math. You'll have seen all the big coding platforms like Cursor and Replicate have now pivoted to use Claude 3.7.
Yeah.
They were actually using Claude 3.5 before that, so they're just moving to the new version of Claude. Absolutely excels in that. What you'll notice about the code and the coding examples that have exploded on X since Claude was released is the fit and finish of the design and the final. These look like SaaS products from companies you'd pay hundreds of dollars a month for. I think in previous coding examples of the previous generations of these models,
it's kind of crude, basic, rudimentary things.
It was amazing that it was able to create that thing in 5 minutes, but it kind of had a signature. It lacked polish, and it was a bit of a basic bitch AI.
Yeah.
Whereas the stuff that Claude's coming out with now is like, it's really professionalized the design of these things.
And I think it's a big thing for adoption. I think you don't realize how important it is for people to have an easy to use, attractive to use interface. That will make a difference. You know, it's
also, so I think it excels at these things, and where you need, don't forget, every LLM is trying to balance two things, which is, by the way, while there never will be an LLM to rule them all, there'll always be an explosion of models, because depending on where you take the slider from creativity to predictability is going to fundamentally depend on that model's ability to hallucinate. So why do models hallucinate, right? Models hallucinate because they need the creativity to come up with a nursery rhyme about Stevie Tel Aviv, the greatest lawyer in Glasgow.
And his pink polka dot bikini.
And a pink polka dot bikini, and be able to churn something out within 2 seconds. They need that level of creativity. That's also what makes them a really convincing liar, okay, and makes them hallucinate. And so some companies, when they produce models, and I'll come on to 4.5 in a second, the models are extremely creative, and the writing output for essays or for storytelling, or even as we bring voice into it for the back and forth chat. If you want an AI that's just going to be a companion to you, and either goes into Grok 3 insane mode or whatever it's called, or based mode, it will sit and swear at you and abuse you all night long as you can stand it. And some people love that shit.
Or advanced voice mode on ChatGPT will be the most empathetic counselor that you've never had, you know?
So in the examples, that's an example of where the creativity is dialed all the way up. So there'll be different flavors of models that solve different things. It's very clear at this point that Claude is predictable. They can make it consistent for specific use cases like coding. It's also the reason why this new Agentic AI class of model is based on Claude 3.7. Now, I know Andy the asshole's going to come onto this in just a second, but I did want to cover something here. So when you're counting on the AI to turn on the oven, and you're counting on the AI to lock the door, or you're counting on the AI to turn on the heating, they're not things you can afford to screw up on and hallucinate, right?
Because you don't want to be too creative on those tasks.
You need to make sure when you said lock the door,
happen.
the thing locked the fucking door, right? And it locked it 100% of the time. So there's very little room for hallucination in that world. That's why Claude has become the agentic or the AI LLM of choice for anybody trying to do meaningful stuff on the agentic side. Because they've been able to prove that they've made it consistent, they've made it reliable. It's the grown-up in the room they can trust.
I'm assuming that works, though, on most AIs if you create your space and your agent and your instructions and they're limited within a space.
No,
That's
it doesn't.
But, right, well, that's a good, because I would always assume had you had a space, which is just basically a box to put your instructions in with a limited number of clear instructions, it would follow those. So, Andy?
No, having built two of these now and one of them being very advanced, it's very good at most things, but it is prone to hallucination and it's particularly terrible on retrieval. So I'll give you an example. If you ask it to bring back every band that's got saxophone and male vocals and on the website, because it's retrieving, because it's filtering as it's retrieving and it's trying to be as token efficient as it possibly can, it's much more likely to bring you back a sample of those bands instead of all the bands that you asked for. And it's also, it's actually a very persistent problem solver, even to its own detriment. So if you tell it to go and check a band's Facebook page and it can't find the information on the band The Rocks' Facebook page, it'll find another band on Facebook called The Rocks, and it'll accidentally retrieve information from their page and pull it through. So once you kind of work with these things for long enough, you get to see the kind of the fallibility and the wee foibles of the system. And that's why, particularly for GPT training, I will definitely look now at Claude 3.7 Sonnet.
When you're uploading your own information, you're supplementing everything that it already knows about the world, right? So it's still got access to that data set it was pre-trained on. You're adding information to it that it doesn't know about your product or your business or your service because it's not publicly available on the internet. So think about the ability to upload and train as like augmentation rather than... Now, Google has a tool called Notebook LM, which is just, I mean, you say, right, here's Google's last 4 earning reports. And now I want to ask you a bunch of questions about Google's last 4 earning reports. And it's only providing answers in the context of the documentation you've uploaded. But that's more like a tool rather than something you could turn around and make.
It's no using its general
facing.
Intelligence to apply to it,
Thank you.
So on the agentic stuff, I do want to return to that because it will feed us into a wider conversation here about Alexa's event that they held, Amazon Alexa's event that they had through the week there.
So we'll save that for
but
the
we will
agent
come back
stuff,
to that in a second. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about Claude 3.7. Extremely professional, excels at coding, math, and agentic workloads, and is now the model of choice for those type of things. ChatGPT 4.5. So the characteristics of 4.5 is it was trained on a much, much larger data set.
The whisper number was something like 4 trillion parameters.
Yeah. So we've
put that into context.
I think we've discussed parameters more. So parameters are almost like logic gates or decision gates that have to be ran for any model to be able to return an answer. There's very small models like Llama 7B you can run on a phone. You start to get to 70 billion parameters. You can barely run that on a laptop. You can only run a 700 billion parameter model in a data center. And you need all the GPUs in the world to run a parameter model above 1 trillion parameters. So it's said, no, I don't think it's said, I think it's known that ChatGPT 4.0 is 1.6 trillion parameters.
Yeah.
Grok 3, which was just released the other week, I think has published 2.6 trillion parameter model. That's what they're saying their parameter count is. It's estimated, although it's now been published or disclosed by ChatGPT, but people are making estimations that 4.5 could be somewhere between 3.5 to 5 trillion parameters. So a gigantic model.
Very expensive to run.
Very expensive to run, but trained on basically all the data available in the world.
And only assholes like me that are prepared to spend the £200 a month on the pro account for ChatGPT get to use it.
Yeah, and the assholes got the golden ticket to use it. Only available on the £200 a month pro plan. The reason that they have said that it's only available on the $200 a month pro plan is there's simply not enough GPUs to offer it to even the £20 a month plus people. And certainly not enough GPUs to run on
They're
the free
racking
people.
tens of thousands of servers from this week onwards to make it available to Plus members.
Yeah.
And they need hundreds of thousands of more servers to make it available to everybody.
Now, when I look at people's reaction to 4.5, I've definitely seen mixed reactions. I've seen people go,
Meh.
what's the big deal? This is like a fucking 5% improvement. Don't know why they even bothered releasing it. And then I've seen people be absolutely blown away by its capabilities. I think it's a complete failure to understand the problem they were trying to solve with 4.5.
Yeah.
So if you go back over the last 2 months, model releases have been linked to their reasoning capabilities.
Yeah.
DeepSeek started this, right? It was the first model that was really leaned in on deep reasoning, and everybody got psychoed out with deep reasoning and what could be done and generating these reports and white papers.
And it's all about crushing benchmarks.
And what we kind of forgot was when people started using these models, it was just ask a question, get an answer, and get it quickly. And you were kind of awed by the quality of the answer. So 4.5 is getting back to that. Can you just ask a question? It now has a much broader set of information that it can return answers across, and higher quality answers with less
quickly.
hallucinations.
And I think the other thing I find interesting, I was just having a quick look there on the internet, but if you take it as being what you said, almost going up to 6 trillion logic gates, the brain, I was just Googling, is about 100 trillion connections.
Yeah.
So actually what we're building is something that's getting to be
A
the
digital
size of a human brain.
Yeah.
Parameters are just the equivalent to synapses in the brain and all the connections that are made between them.
So
It's an exact
Yeah,
equivalency.
6%.
They're solving the same problem as synapses solve in the brain. So I think what people don't understand about ChatGPT, what they were focused on was ChatGPT's ability to be creative and emotive.
Yeah.
And when Sam actually started leaking tweets about ChatGPT 4.5 a day or two before it was released. And in one of the tweets, he said something like, you know, that I've had some of the...
I sat back in my chair and I was just like...
I've sat back in my chair and I've had a few AGI moments in the last couple of days using this new model we're about to release. And of course, what he meant by that is he wasn't struck that it solved some PhD problem, or he wasn't struck that it invented some new physics. He was blown away with how human
the interaction where it was.
felt.
Yeah.
It's the Alan Turing test that's
It was starting to feel like you were
can't tell the
communicating
difference.
with
Yeah,
a human.
absolutely.
And by the way, for anybody who's not used the voice mode, anybody listen, if you've never used the voice mode on any of these models, I would highly...
I am obsessed with advanced voice mode on ChatGPT. It is
just do it as an
unbelievable.
exercise. I mean, I think the longest back and forth I've had is over 20 minutes. Just literally left it on with the mic running, threw the odd silly question at it, started a conversation, found reasons to go back and forth just to see how long it could go. And I ended up getting exhausted before it did.
And it's very natural, the interaction. It's not like this kind of robotic, almost like a Alexa 1.0 type interaction. It feels very natural.
Is it available for breakfast on a Wednesday morning?
How dare you?
But that's what he meant by that. And I think people confuse that. Well, there must be some amazing new technological breakthrough. And there is. It's just in a different place
It's an
to where
EQ,
people are
it's
looking.
an EQ breakthrough, not an IQ breakthrough.
That is a great way of
analogy.
putting it.
Absolutely.
It's an EQ breakthrough. So it's very, very human-like in its responses. It's great in particular at crafting empathetic responses. It's great at emotive responses. And so think about use cases like a very good counselor for somebody to talk back and forth with in that voice mode.
Yeah. Can I just share one of the best? And I actually heard this on another show.
Not the sex doll industry, is
No,
it?
no, no. I heard
Talking
this.
sex doll industry.
this on
Not
another-
that I've been conducting any experiments on my own on that subject matter.
Never. This absolutely fascinated me. I was listening to another show and they were talking about advanced voice mode. And it was a guy talking about his 91-year-old mother that had just been there to visit. And she always had this idea of creating the story of her life. She could never find the time or the words or the writing skills or a ghostwriter to help her do it. And she wanted this heirloom that she could leave her family when she was not there and her grandkids could really understand her. And so he put on advanced voice mode and he said, this is my mother. She's 91. This is the objective. I want you to interview her for an hour. Ask her all about her upbringing. Ask her about her career. Ask her about her family and her children, how she felt about them. Ask her about this. Ask her about that. He went, and at the end of it, I want you to transcribe it into
Write the story of her life.
Write the story of her life. And it sat for 90 minutes and it just peppered her in a two-way voice interaction with his mum, peppered her with questions and wrote this 127-page story of her life, which you can then augment with pictures and stuff like that, save as a PDF, and your family have an heirloom forever. Now, what a fabulous...
Which they can keep in their attic, having never read for the rest of their natural lives.
I thought that was a really, really lovely...
Yeah, I do like that idea.
I'm going to take your blow-up doll, put that to it, sitting around my mum for an hour. God love you, Mum. She could chat to that for long as she can chat to me.
Keep her company.
Yes.
So I think we're heading to a very interesting place, and I think ChatGPT 4.5 was over most people's head. I think they were looking in the wrong place for where the advancement was here, but when you actually look closely at the examples, it is very, very impressive. Now, I'll tell you what it's left me very much with the impression of, and that is that we've had a frenzy of activity in the last 4 to 6 weeks with different companies trying to gazump each other. I think we're now at the end of that cycle.
Yeah.
I think in order to create the next wave... Now, by the way, I think there'll be incremental improvement. None of these guys have to go and retrain the models again in order to keep incremental improvements coming. That's all in fine-tuning and reinforcement learning and other post-training activity. But I think to get the next breakthrough in capability... There probably is going to be a 6-month period here of building out infrastructure,
100%.
building out data centers, building out teams and capabilities.
Everybody's racking Blackwells and stuff to try and get to that next level. So you're probably talking about maybe 8 or 9 months before the next, maybe ChatGPT 5 or Grok 4 or whatever comes out.
I think we have a quiet spring and summer, and I think as we get into the autumn or the fall and winter, I think you start to see some announcements again. But I think we've came out of this frenetic period of activity. We're all now blessed with wonderful, capable tools that can do so much, and will continue to incrementally get better as the weeks and the months tick by. But the next breakthrough, I think now we're into the back end of 25.
And 99.999999999% of people will still not use any of it at all.
Exactly. Well, you say that, ChatGPT released some numbers yesterday, 400 million weekly active users.
With a pathway to 1 billion MAUs before the end of the year.
I mean, I listened to the Google earnings call last week. They're forecasting 500 million Gemini users by the end of the year. So between the two companies, you're talking about 1 billion people. So you say there's not a lot of people using this, but there must be way more than we are anecdotally.
The adoption is crazy. What I'm talking about is there's nobody using its capabilities. Most people are still using it in the very rudimentary use cases.
They're using it as a better search engine.
That was my experience today. I was at a lecture today. Fabulous legal system. Looks a bit like Perplexity with its own space and its own agent effectively. Asked a group of students. Most of them, about 80-90% of them, are using some form of AI on a daily basis. About 10% understood that it was spaces or agents.
Yeah.
So I think what we're beginning to see, and I'm sure this is going to lead you in nicely, Andy, about agents and why people aren't really yet understanding how they work, how they use them.
Yeah. So that brings us nicely on to Agentic AI. AI you can use in your everyday life, and AI that does stuff. Doesn't just retrieve information, but it goes and does things for you. So I think this week we saw Amazon's Alexa Plus event. I'll be honest with you. One of the things I'm really disappointed about that event is they never televised it. All I've ever, usually when a company has a keynote like that and they want to distribute the information, like they do a live stream and they stick it up on YouTube. It was a press only event. And what I've seen so far have been 3-5-minute snippets of different demos that were done through it. But I've never actually seen the keynote because it doesn't really exist.
Let's frame this contextually, right? So you may remember that on our very first podcast, the prediction show, I said that 2025 would be the year that AI finally became practical and useful for ordinary people. And I specifically highlighted this idea of agentic capability, where AI wouldn't just answer questions, it would actually run off and do things for you on your behalf. Now, when I said that, if I'm being completely honest, even though I was confident in that prediction, I wasn't exactly sure what it would look like in the real world, right? I couldn't make my mind up whether you would just need 24 apps in your phone, with each one specializing in like its own specific task. Well, we're only 7 weeks removed from that episode. And in 7 short weeks, I think it's becoming crystal clear now how this agentic AI is going to manifest and play out in real life. So we're going to deep dive into AI agents, what they are, who the big players are, what they can do for us, and why this matters so much. And we're going to explore how these tools are about to disrupt absolutely everything from, shaking up Google's dominance in search to radically transforming the ways that we discover, choose, and buy products. So first things first, Paddy, what is an AI agent? What's your best description of what an AI agent is?
An AI agent is something that can understand your request and then using connections to different services can go and fulfill a task for you. Either a single step task or a multi-step process can go away and do work on your behalf.
So it can fill in form data. It can book things, it can generate confirmations, it can make payments, it can do practical things for you. So if anybody was under any confusion about what an AI agent is, hopefully now you know.
Practical examples are always best. Alexa, book me a table at the local Italian restaurant tonight. Make sure they've got at least 5 stars on an open table and there's going to be 3 of us.
And up until 3 days ago, that was an impossible task, right? So Alexa could go and do the research for you, but she couldn't do shit for you after bringing you back the information. So do you want to talk about what Amazon Plus is, what the big breakthrough is about Alexa Plus and what it can actually do with this new level of capability?
So Alexa Plus is taking the Alexa that everybody knows, that can pick a song for you and tell you the time and set a timer. And that's the 3 things that people have used Alexa and Google and all the other early AI capabilities for. And it's adding the ability to go and do things. Now, interestingly, Alexa Plus, there's no new hardware associated with Alexa Plus. Alexa Plus runs on all the Alexa hardware you've already got. So interestingly, they never made a new box or a new speaker or a new screen that you had to install in your kitchen. Absolutely true.
Is the Alexa Show, the new Alexa Show product, does that not get different capabilities?
Alexa Show's been out for years. It's not.
But I thought this was a new Alexa Show, no?
There is no new hardware associated with it at all. It runs on all the original. It runs on everything except the original Alexa, the one that looked like a big tall cylinder. I've got it in the place next door.
So what the difference is, the integrations with the 15 to 20 partners that they're piloting with.
And so I think their approach to it is really clever, right? What they are doing is doing a 2.0 of what was originally termed Alexa Skills.
Right.
So Alexa Skills is where you used to be able to connect Alexa to a service by logging in and authenticating and connecting your Alexa with that account, which would then allow it to do stuff. Classic example, Alexa, here's my Spotify login. Every time I ask for a song by Chris Stapleton, look up Spotify for Chris Stapleton songs. This is an exaggerated version of that. So what they've got in the background is integrations with 25 different services.
Including Netflix, Amazon, Thumbtack, Ring Doorbell, Ticketmaster, Grubhub, Whole Foods, and Amazon Fresh, to name just a few.
Yeah. And these are like API level integrations rather than having to work out how to navigate through a web page in advance, So you've seen examples like ChatGPT's operator where you can sort of command it to do something and it will make a pretty miserable attempt at trying to advance through web pages to do that thing. This is like bypassing all that and saying, right, we've built a high quality integration with OpenTable or Netflix, and we're just going to go ahead and leverage that. So think about the AI agent being able to take your request.
So in Alexa's case, through a voice command, not through...
Correct.
Because other agents operate through text prompts, right?
So through a voice command, and then knowing that it's got these 15 or 20 integrations, each of which are described and can solve different problems. And then it intelligently goes and uses those integrations where it feels it can solve a problem for you based on your request.
And the genius part of it is, if you've got an Amazon account, which you will do if you've got an Alexa, you've got a Prime account, which means they have all your personal information and they have your payment information, so they can run off on your behalf and do all these things for you and
They know your
generate
address,
these confirmations.
they know your credit card information. You don't have to re-input all that stuff.
So let me sum that one up and ask one question. So basically what you're saying is now you don't even have to get up from your couch. You are basically going to sit there in a pool of your own whatever, ordering your pizza, changing the channel with no need to move a bone. And the only question I have to ask at the end of all of that is, with all of that technology,
Sign me up.
does it yet understand a Scottish accent?
Well, I found all the voice agents now very good. I'll be honest with you. I don't really struggle with any of them anymore.
But let's be honest, in any given sentence, Paddy's got a South African, Australian or English accent.
And a bit of American occasionally thrown in there.
So, yeah, I think that's a solved problem. But what the interesting thing about Alexa Plus is it's got long-term memory as well. So the examples, I'll give you some of the demos they did in the presentation was things like, hey, Alexa, I'm a Chris Stapleton fan. Keep an eye out for Chris Stapleton tickets within a 200-mile radius of Glasgow. And then like weeks later, the Alexa screen on your kitchen wall going, oh, hey, Paddy, there's 2 Chris Stapleton tickets available 4 weeks on Tuesday at the Hydro in Glasgow. Do you want me to go ahead and book them? And you go, yep, grab them. And it grabs the 2 tickets.
Because it's got the StubHub integration or whatever,
or the Ticketmaster integration or whatever it is. So it can do things like that as well. So booking restaurants, one of the really, I thought, cool demos was they were playing the song Shallow.
Yeah, from A Star Is Born.
A Star Is Born. On the shallow.
Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga.
Yeah, Lady Gaga. And while listening to the song Shallow, the guy went, oh, I love that song. Go straight to that part of the movie. And then the TV came on with the Fire TV stick and it fast forwarded straight to that scene of the movie where Shallow's game. So you're talking about very deep integrations now with various different services that are all linked up and talking to each other.
A very deep integration with a lot of the home automation stuff, including Ring doorbell. So you can say, Alexa, show I'm waiting on an Amazon parcel. When the guy comes to the door, when you greet him at the door, can you just tell him to leave it in the porch? And it's like, Roger that, and it'll go and do it.
So one of the things I've always found with Amazon as a good example is it's a bit of time to actually spend getting all this things set up on your phone and your app.
Yep.
And that's a pain point for me. I can't be bothered. I had a central heating thermostat that blew, replaced it. I did it eventually. We had to go in, rename it. So have they solved any
This
of
is the best part about it. These aren't the apps that you'll interact with individually. You'll just have a ChatGPT account, or you'll have an Amazon Alexa account. They're doing all the integrations for you. You're just barking orders at Alexa. End of story. One account, one integration.
And because Alexa is Amazon, if you have an Amazon account, they already know what your address is. They don't need you to provide that. They already know you've got a card on file. They don't need you to provide that. They can leverage all the assets associated with your Amazon account. That's part of the permissions you give it when you sign up for Alexa. Now, this service is free to Prime members only. If you are not a Prime member, they're actually selling it as a subscription for $19.99 a month. But if you're a Prime member, you get it for free.
Which, think about it, is tremendous value, even if you've got to pay 20 quid a month for it.
My understanding is coming out in the US later in March.
Yeah.
Will be available in other countries, including the UK, later in the year. So it's pretty clear they're going slow and steady with this. I think the danger, and again, back to Claude 3.7 and that predictability, if they've got your address on file and they've got your card on file, what they can't afford to happen is Alexa comes back and goes, "Thanks, Stevie Tel Avivi. I've bought 480 tickets for Chris Stapleton." And you
And
go
I've just
check the
pulled your
credit
card
cards.
for $72,000.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think there's a slow and steady wins the race here. I think the approach is great. To this day, it's the best example of real world agentic AI working for real people.
Because I'll basically counter that. Well, sorry, I'll double click on that by telling you a fairly shit example of something similar, which is ChatGPT Operator. So ChatGPT Operator is the same concept. So they have all these integrations with all these third parties like Grubhub, like Uber, like Fork for, table reservations and stuff. But it's a text prompting system. Now, but the way they do it, you type in, you go into ChatGPT Operator and you say, book me an Italian restaurant tonight in Glasgow, 4.5 rated or above. Then using its own proprietary browser, it goes, searches the internet for the nearest integration that it's got for that type of task. And you actually watch it. It's like a slow shit version of you going through the fields on the websites and filling in form data and interacting with filters and searching stuff on the site. But it was basically designed as a proof of concept. It's clear now that all of this stuff, the endpoint for all of this stuff is going to be voice, right? Because ChatGPT have got both things at the same time. They've got Operator, which shows the integrations, but they've also got advanced voice mode, and you have to believe at some point they're going to combine those two services to create this kind of Alexa Plus type offering.
Personally, I think we're quite a bit away from a consistent, because there's so much variability on how a web page gets built.
Yeah.
You would think it would all be standard. There's shit developers, there's great developers, there's guys who do best practice, there's guys who hack things together. It's actually a much harder problem to solve than you think.
Navigating websites on a browser is not an optimal solution. It's clear that interacting with the API endpoints for these integrations is a way to get stuff done efficiently.
And what we're seeing actually again is Web 1.0. We're effectively back to some really interesting, world-changing, life-changing technologies. And yet we're going to have a little bit of time yet before we see them optimize in the best possible way.
I'll tell you the only thing it does make me think about, though, does it not just consolidate power with the big 24 platforms that run your life? Like,
nope.
How does the next startup or the next small business participate and get that traffic from Alexa or get that?
Well, there's going to be a tractor beam aggregator dynamic to this, that once these 2025 integrations start getting real traction, the guys on the sidelines are just going to pile in and will bet the farm on their ChatGPT integration or their Alexa Plus integration. And you'll just see that store go from 25 integrations to 225 to 2,225 to cover every facet of your life, essentially.
It's the same thing. If you're going to sit there today and look at history, it's exactly as Andy says. If you want to own the future, take advantage of the future, be the one first to or second to. And I think you're going to see that in law, you're going to see it in almost everything. It's the ones that will take the pain just now to build the models that will be the early adopters, will be the ones that will reap it. And it will be mainly the big firms, but there'll be huge opportunities for everyone because it's the early adopters. The early adopters that can build and survive will be the ones that will be the Amazons of the future.
But some of the biggest firms might actually be the most vulnerable. And I think that brings us on to who's in the crosshairs of this stuff, right? So how many hundreds of millions of search requests are getting actioned now on AI platforms as opposed to traditional Google search?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean for the future of Google and, 10 blue links and SEO?
I would say it's pretty existential. I mean, I know that anecdotally, 80% of what I would normally have typed into Google, I now type into Perplexity.
Yeah.
Because Perplexity is just going to give me the answer, not 10 blue links.
Yeah.
I'm the same. And
by the way, anytime I ever have to go back and get 10 blue links, it seems like a drag.
It's torturous.
It's like, fucking hell. Like, am I really going to go and click through all these websites and start reading them?
And remember, the only quality filter of those 10 blue links you get is who was prepared to pay the most money in the auction to get that placement. It doesn't mean you're going to get a particularly good answer, right? There's no quality ranking, really. So I think Google's foundational business model is under threat. Now, obviously, they're reacting to that by, so if you look, you'll have noticed in your phone recently, if you put any Google search in, the first answer that you get is Gemini's AIs, right?
Yep.
Now, that seems counterintuitive at the start because it's almost like Google is cannibalizing its own business model. Why is it giving you the answer to your question for free with no clickable link to the website that you're... So what's the thinking behind that?
Say it again.
So
It's
you
a
put a
race.
search term into Google, the first response that you get is the Gemini AI powered answer, which takes up the top third of the real estate on the screen, but with no clickable link and no way to currently monetize for Google. So why would they do that? Pushing all the blue links and all the SEO listings ever further down the page.
Because I've said this for a while. I think they are in a death race to own the future of AI. They need to be the go-to model in the same way as we Google things. We now talk about ChatGPT more than we talk about anything else. So what becomes the industry standard, the word that we use for everything?
Well,
So you're referring to the Google AI overview, right? So I've just asked it what engine does the Nissan Figaro have, and it's not gave me a bunch of links. It's actually gave me the answer. The Nissan Figaro has a 1 litre engine.
But the point here is it seems to be on the face of it short-term sabotaging its own business model. So instead of serving you the links and getting the money,
I don't think it's
for
got
your
a
clicks
choice.
on that.
Yeah.
Because
How does it replace $170 billion?
slowly over time in a controlled fashion is how it does it. It doesn't do it overnight. So what you need is 500 million people paying 25 quid a month for Gemini.
Yeah.
Amazon's a great example. Amazon wholesale services, the online data centers. The best example, Amazon itself doesn't make money, but ultimately it can afford. It's got the biggest oxygen tank in the world. It can afford to deep dive until everyone else drowns.
Drown everybody else.
And Google has got incredibly deep pockets, and it can afford to take a hit on its search
Core search business.
until it gets its dominance in AI.
It can afford to. Whether that would be acceptable to shareholders
Shareholders
would be a
is a
completely
different
different
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
But it can definitely afford to. Don't forget, it's got multiple ways to win as well.
Absolutely.
So if 40 billion of the whatever it is, $200 billion worth of, I think it's $157 billion worth of search revenue.
Yeah. Of the 350 billion total revenue.
So let's do some back of the apron
It's
math.
50%
right?
of the revenue-ish.
If you can transition hundreds of millions of people to a Gemini subscription, and
Hang on. Who's ever transitioned hundreds of millions of people to a paid subscription other than Netflix?
Apple have hundreds of millions of people who pay for iCloud and iCloud Plus.
It's largely, listen, at the end of the day, it's not an argument worth having,
Yeah.
because the reality of it is search is dead.
They have to.
So
they've got to find a way. But the point I was coming to there,
No, search isn't dead,
hang on.
but-
Let's say they don't cover the whole amount through transitioning people to Gemini. Well, they can make 20, 30, 40, $50 billion off of being the rails from GCP, from Google Cloud Platform. You could argue that financially they're incented more than anybody to build the best, most capable AI possible. And if they do that, between serving it up to people at a margin through GCP, Google Cloud Platform, being the back-end AI provider to other people's products and services, and still having some search revenue left, and still transitioning a whole bunch of people to a Gemini subscription, I think it's a combination of the things that make
It
up
gets it there eventually.
the search revenue.
Because the one thing that's clear, Google has made us lazy in terms of how we search. So keyword search doesn't return the best results, but it is a very efficient way of trying to triangulate around about a solution. So in my industry, it's like wedding bands Glasgow, wedding bands Scotland. But I think as people get more comfortable and knowledgeable about how to use AI and the concept of prompting, search is going to change to who is the best wedding band in Glasgow with male vocals and saxophone that also does a Kaylee set at the end of the night.
Yeah.
To spit out that answer.
And with all disruption, there will be new winners and new losers. There'll be people that will be early adopters that will suddenly have a new business model that they're going to maximize on. And there'll be legacy businesses that are too scared or stupid to transition. So I think Google have to be applauded because they're actually grabbing the thorn.
They're dealing with the innovator's dilemma problem. They're the incumbent, the moat is now gone.
Yeah.
They either ride the thing all the way down and just keep cranking the price of ads to cope with the volume that they're losing, or they try and go and reinvent another future for themselves, and that's what they're doing.
And what does that mean for the guys that are adverts? So like me, who spends 5 figures a month.
This is not.
On
it
Google
means your ads are going to become fantastically more expensive over the next 12 to 18 months. Yeah. This is not future state stuff. They're losing paid click-throughs right now.
Yeah.
Paid click-throughs, depending on the search term, could be down as much as 40% to what they used to be.
And I think you have to split
for
that
the
up
viewers.
into
I've got a chart
information.
up on the screen here that I'm sharing with the guys.
But it's in the same way you benefited from what you've been kind enough to share, that when Facebook first came along, you found a cheaper way to market, a better way to market. You're going to find the exact same thing happening here. People will understand how to position themselves best to be found under ChatGPT or Gemini, and you'll redesign your business.
I think that's the big takeaway. I think guys that done their bollocks in on SEO and stuff like that are probably going to have a really hard time in the short term. But I actually think the whole thing will pivot to, if you just focus on the fundamentals that never change, which is if you make sure that your product pages and your website is incredibly high quality, incredibly high authority, well laid out, well structured stuff, you're giving yourself the best possible chance of getting pulled through in that answer. But then if there's no click, if there's no end product at the end of that answer, so if it says, great, your band, the Big Papas, are the best band in Glasgow with saxophone and blah, 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 then you're depending on somebody running a separate search request or typing in a separate URL.
Now, but there's a future state. I mean, future state, years down the line, that's probably not a query that results in an answer. That's probably an ongoing dialogue that results in...
With your voice agent who...
It's right. Who's the best band that does live sax, vocals, 4-piece, that have got a charismatic frontman who've played this venue within 20 miles of Glasgow? And then the search engine comes back and goes, that's the Big Papas, Andy. And you go, great, let me hear them. And then it returns and starts playing their audio or their video, and you go, that's awesome, go ahead and book them for the 28th of February. Okay. So I think back to the agentic thing, I think there'll be a transition layer where we ask questions, we get back answers for informational stuff, and then for some stuff we do have to go then to the internet and make subsequent searches or go to a website. Yeah. But I think where it all ends up...
It's just this two-way dialogue that ends up in
It's a two-way dialogue that ends up in action that an agent is taking on your behalf.
When technology works well, and we all kind of understand the basis of this, it is better for the customer. And ultimately, I am so sick and tired of getting 27 Google suggestions, none of which suit what I need, none of which answer my question, most of which are bought rather than properly ranked. So ultimately, from the public's point of view, being given the solution and then the link to click back to the person who's provided that is way, way better for the public. And the great companies like your own, Andy, will simply benefit in the long term from that kind of quality of
and I think you have to separate search out into informational search and transactional search. So a lot of the informational search terms, like how many people are in China, a lot of that stuff's getting actioned on AI platforms like Perplexity and ChatGPT, but a lot of the, B2B software companies in the office product space or wedding bands in Scotland, those kind of transactional searches, a lot of that for a while will still get executed on Google. I would say
for now, for now. But I don't feel great about the security of any of that in a 24-month period of time.
The question that you got to ask yourself is, when the thing becomes completely joined up, what happens to the question, find me the cheapest?
Yeah.
That'll be easy. You could probably do that just
Absolutely, but what it means is you then get huge volume towards, and then you're trying to work out all of the other things that sit between cheapest, best quality. But ultimately, it's going to drive huge amounts of business in two directions, and the middle will become a really interesting ground.
I think people are doing all that stuff today. I think when you look at the searches, it's like cheap wedding bands in Scotland, cheap A4 paper, cheap desks in my area. I think cheap is just a verb that goes on the front of every single search request.
Yeah.
Already. I don't think it's a new thing. Whether that then lands you on the cheap thing or not is a completely different thing.
And my point is, when you've got agents that really understand what cheap means and can compare price for price. It'll be fascinating to see how that one plays out, whether it really drives down prices or whether it drives innovation about how you trick the model.
And to be, like, back to my earlier point, trying to be careful that it doesn't actually consolidate power in the hands of a dozen big companies and everybody else,
Yep.
struggles
to be
compete.
small. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Very good. I think we've done agentic AI to death. I think we know where it's headed. I think we'll keep a very close eye on Alexa Plus when we get it into the wild. No doubt I will be signing up to that as well.
Is your 17th AI
It's my
subscription?
17th AI subscription. Will be able to report back on what it's actually like to use.
Stephen, bring us home with war in Ukraine.
So
Some light
A
bedtime
nice
conversation.
cheesy.
I thought, obviously, for listeners, they probably saw some of the stuff that happened over the news of the weekend, and very much, I don't want to get into the politics of that.
But
But what I thought would be interesting was just for a second, when it comes to war, we hear these massive figures being mentioned all the time. And I was trying to understand what has actually been paid. What does it actually cost to buy things? Where's tech and AI in all of this? So I'm going to take you through just some rough figures. I've done a bit of quick research and to really look at where we are at the moment, what might be happening down the line, what the kind of lessons we've learned from some of the tech that's already coming onto the scene, and where the future might go. So we hear all kinds of numbers being flown about. What's actually been spent already? And I've done a few different searches, and I'm going to come up with some figures. You can feel free to clarify these later on. US military aid, as far as I can work out at the moment, actually delivered onto the ground, is about £114 billion. Okay. 114. So we hear figures many times.
$350 billion and
114 delivered. Now, what are the big ticket items? And I think this is where it's interesting. So there's HIMARS rocket systems.
Yep.
These are the ones that keep you safe from things coming in from the sky.
air defense.
Air defense systems. That is about 3.7 billion. Patriot air defense, also protecting you, 13.2 billion. Javelin anti-tank missiles, Abrams tanks, artillery shells, 8 billion. So basically, even in this war, ultimately, explosive things to
That's kind of how you destroy a city, isn't it? You just fire enough
big
shells at it until there's nothing
thrown
left.
from a distance. But actually, the other one I thought was fascinating, logistics, which is basically intel. I think a lot of that comes down to things like Starlink and the other things, 89 billion. So that's the biggest single line item. And I'll come on to that in a second. So America, about 114 billion of spent. Europe and member states, 138.7 billion. So Europe has put more money, more skin in the game. Different things.
Contrary to popular belief.
And these are figures that I've come up with and maybe other suggestions. But tanks, air defense, Storm Shadow missiles, howitzers, obviously the big guns that are firing these. So
we're not talking hard cash here. We're talking about the value of the materiel that we're providing, right? Because some of the stuff you had lying in the cupboard for years ago, right?
Yeah,
but it does have a monetary value, and I understand that.
And they've also got to be shipped over, and they're going to be replaced. And the other thing to remember is, Ukraine is grateful for all the support it's getting, but it's also spending its own money. It has to spend its own money. So it's spent about 147.8 billion so far. A lot of that is drone production, artillery shells,
Zelensky's clothing line.
Neptune missiles, which is effectively similar to Javelin. So there's about 411 billion spent, but it's about a third. Roughly. We're not going to get too tied up in that. There are also funds obliged and funds allocated. So there's also a pipeline. So again, without going too much into the politics of it, the question is only whether any of those promises will be backtracked on. But there's actually, so if we stop tomorrow, there's still a pipeline of things coming through over years yet that would go to supplement. The issues then come down to what happens if, for example, America decided to to stop supplying or supporting Ukraine tomorrow? What are the things that would really impact? And really, it's the high tech stuff. It's the air defense. It's the HIMARS and the Patriot missiles. There are some European equivalents, but not many. Nothing for the HIMARS, but for the Patriots, Europe does have some systems which would take up about 60% of that. So the ability to do the satellite stuff, the Starlink stuff, is almost zero. So
that's all targeting and surveillance and all that stuff.
It's all the high tech stuff. Now, on the other side of that, Ukraine has been working away at trying to improve its ability to produce things. So it now produces its own drones. The cost of a US or NATO-based drone, roughly, about $80,000 for a military-grade drone to be provided. Ukraine's now producing its own drones for about $500.
Wow.
So a saving of 99%.
Wow.
122mm shells, so these big shells.
Seems impossibly cheap.
You could buy a DJI drone for 500 quid.
But ultimately,
and that's what they're dropping rudimentary grenades on them.
When you go back to first principles, what bits go into a drone is basically a bit of plastic, a few microprocessors. The actual cost of producing them is very low when you can scale. Same with shells. It's producing its own shells for about $800 as opposed to about $3,000. So saving about 73%. And the missiles, the anti-tank missiles, which are costing about just under $200,000 for the Javelin missiles. The Ukrainian equivalent is about $20,000, so about a 90% saving. So basically, it is managing to produce many things at much lower cost, but it can't produce the more tech things. And its limitations, actually its biggest limitation is now in microchips. So basically it's the ability to get its hands on microprocessors.
I think the scary thing is it also just, in an overarching way, it just really spells out the horrible cost of prosecuting a war. I mean, the UK defence budget is something like 55, 60 billion pounds a year. Ukraine's spending about 170 billion a year just trying to defend its territory. So it is a crazy expensive business.
Well, one of the things that we have to consider is there anything coming up that will make things easier? And the difficulty, one of the things that's really interesting is lasers. So we've already had several successful trials of laser type technologies.
Freaking lasers.
Yep. You've got actually, so think about the best example I'm going to give is the Israeli Iron Dome. We've heard about that. It keeps Israel safe from incoming missiles. We saw a perfect example of that recently when the Iranian missile strike, multiple missiles, and most of them were taken out above. The problem with that is it's a missile to take out a missile. So often you're spending, we saw it there, $50,000, $100,000 to take out something which only costs a few $100s to make. They're not guaranteed to be successful, so very expensive, and they can be overcome. Israel is quite close to, I think it's going to be this year, it launches its ROC system. It's going to be one of the most...
the ion laser.
Basically, it's the equivalent of the Iron Dome. It doesn't replace the Iron Dome because it's got a couple of weaknesses, but it does make taking out drones in particular much cheaper. It's down to $10 to $15 a shot. So basically,
and pricing aside, when you're in a world of hypersonic missiles and speed matters, nothing beats the speed of light, right? So that's ultimately what you need to move towards to basically take out projectiles that are moving at many, many, many thousands of miles an hour.
I think you're going to jump forward probably 10 years in the ability. You know, at the moment, it's going to take out the middle range. It's still going to be, you still need the American systems to take out the hypersonics, the intercontinental, all of these things. But ultimately, it does mean that a lot of the damage just now has been done by drones coming in, blowing up various things. So we're moving towards that system, and systems like that are arriving already. Britain, funnily enough, has got a system which is close to launch, and Ukraine has got, I think it's called Trident, if I remember correctly, but Ukraine actually has launched its own system. There are limits to them. They're not great in the fog, surprisingly enough. Obviously, the more energy you can produce, so it's basically just a big battery attached to a laser. So the bigger the battery, the more kilowatts you can push out. So it's not as powerful, but you'll get 10 to 15 bursts out of one. So it's a really interesting technology, and it's bringing down the cost of taking down drones to literally $10 or $20 or $30 a shot.
$2 to $5 on my screen here when I look it up. Crazy.
So, and there are systems already in place and coming on stream, which brings me kind of round to the future. So the future, unfortunately, is that we are still...
It's the drone wars.
Well, it's still dependent. War is always won from the high ground. So ultimately, you have to hold the high ground or defend against the high ground. Those technologies that America has, the satellite technology and the ability to stop the big, fast missiles coming in, still needs to be there. Europe needs to ramp up to get up to pace in those. That is not a year. That is multiple years to get there.
And we could save ourselves $100 billion and just tap up Jaja Binks and tell us how to create the Gungan force field.
It would be nice, but that's a little bit off yet. What we are going to see, though, I think the best example I could find was, of course, what happened in Germany at the beginning of all of this conflict. It had the gas pipelines cut, and it was therefore left with no gas supply, and it had to create access to liquid gas terminals, LPG terminals. And it managed to build these in, I think, 6 to 7 months. Ultimately, how did it do it? It pushed aside...
Necessity is the mother of invention.
It pushed aside all of the requirements for regulation.
Permitting. Environmental auto studies.
Yeah. So all of that stuff was pushed aside. It took the entrepreneur's view of basically finding options. So a lot of the materials were used were already on the shelf and simply adapted rather than built. And it created quick, sensible solutions. So it's ended up with actually overcapacity. Actually, Germany has got more LPG than it requires. It didn't necessarily invest in future-proof technologies, but it has resolved the issue, and it's increased its storage way beyond what it needs. So Germany now seems to be gas safe. It's a more expensive source, but it has the source. And I think that's really my point moving forward. I think Europe's at a really interesting point. I think everyone here accepts Europe is going to have to spend a lot more money on defence. I think the question comes as to whether we see this as an emergency. So we're time constrained, and we've all talked about time constraint brings innovation.
Yeah.
And ultimately, time constraint, like the Second World War, brought out the best in technology. And I think Germany showed it at the beginning of the crisis by getting its LPG issue sorted. And the question is, will the rest of Europe now step forward and put that kind of innovation to work?
And if things get really bad, we can send them one of our 46 serviceable tanks.
That's irrelevant.
Tanks
Tanks are not on the inventory. They're just little.
Well, we know Europe's got the people. There's 500 million Europeans.
It's got the dough.
It's got the capital, because we have proven that we can create capital for pretty much anything we decide is worthwhile of the capital. What I am very skeptical of is, can we have the coordination between all these different countries that speak all these different languages
and have all these different cultures
to actually come together and get coordinated on an effort like that? I think who's the leader of Poland?
Aye.
I think he said today in a news conference, and I'd never really thought about it like this. He said, why are 500 million Europeans waiting on 300 million Americans defending them from 140 million Russians?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all fair point. I think necessity is the mother of invention, and I think we probably see where we've been lazy, where we've relied on America. And actually, I think that you look back to other conflicts and the fabulous industries that have risen from those wartime economies or conflict economies, brings about innovation, productivity. There may yet be a silver lining in this if it invigorates European innovation and productivity again.
Yeah.
It's not the way I'd want it to be done, but it's certainly a potential byproduct.
100%, and that's probably a good note to finish it on. If it somehow can give Europe the wake up call that it needs to get its shit together, get coordinated, and start being the problem solver.
Yep.
In this part of the world,
Instead of being led about by the nose.
hell yeah, we'd all be grateful for that.
How are we doing for time? Did we make it? Did we do
We've
it?
blown it. It's 1 hour and 5 minutes.
Right, okay, well, let's
went on too
wrap
long.
it at that. It's 15 minutes shorter than last week.
Okay, well, there you have it, folks. Episode 8 in the can. Now, we should probably just discuss a wee
yes.
programming note for next week. So Andy the asshole and I are both away.
So next week I will be golfing in Forteventura. Paddy's going to be in Ireland. None of us are back for the Monday.
Correct.
So what I think we're going to try and do is maybe get the show out for the Wednesday that week, if possible. We should probably have spoken about this instead of doing it on air. But
Listen in, good listeners. While you're liking, subscribing, and sharing, keep an eye on the space. We've got 1 or 2 ideas. If we're not back next Monday, it's only because we're taking a holiday. But I rather suspect we've got a plan. Time. Mother of invention.
Yeah.
Time
is constraint.
we'll only be if we're late at all, we'll only be a couple of days late. So don't trip. But if you're sitting there with bated breath,
Okay, come on. We've wound this up enough. They're already bored with listening to us.
So please like, subscribe, and share.
please,
There was tremendous sharing done on the previous episode.
and there was many dozens of downloads on the Proton Drive for that course, that PDF course that we did,
I'm
which
sure
I was
that'll continue to
delighted
pick
to
up.
see. Yeah.
And some schools have jumped on that. So I'll be speaking to a couple of 100 6-year leavers at the end of next month. And a few other opportunities have came out of that as well. So great to be able to get the word out there. So there you go, folks. Episode 8 in the can. We did it. Okay, everybody. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Good night, guys.